folks from the USDA and Department of Justice up here, and by lottery we'll just simply call on people based on the numbers you've got. Hopefully folks will limit their comments to a couple of minutes so we can get another 40 minutes of interaction with the folks in the audience in addition to what will happen at the end of the day. So that'll come after this panel discussion. This morning our second panel is going to be folks who are actually on the ground, so to speak, and in the field, farmers and ranchers who are dealing with the circumstances of agriculture today. I'm just going to briefly introduce all the panel members, and then we'll direct questions to them. So we'll move this along. With us today is Eric Nelson, who's a fourth-generation farmer and cattle feeder from Iowa. Mr. Nelson has been a certified crop advisor since 1995. He's worked in the seed industry on sales and product management, and since 2004, he's worked as a farmer, cattle feeder, seed salesman, and crop advisor. Pam Johnson also joins us today. She and her family raise corn and soybeans in Floyd, Iowa. They've farmed for, I don't know, do you really want me to say how long you farmed? For a while, let me just put it that way, and represents the fifth generation in the farming business, so we're happy to have Pam with us. Ken Fawcett is an independent crop farmer who's raised on his family farm in West Branch. He attended Iowa State University, received a Bachelor of Science in Farm Operations, returned to his family's farm in 1972. He raises corn and soybeans, including non-GMO, specialty soybeans, and white corn. Eddie Wise raises tilapia, sweet potatoes, and hogs in Whitakers, North Carolina, former Green Beret. He's also taught at Georgetown University and other institutions. Is active in the Black Farmers Agriculturalist Association and the Twin Rivers Swine Co-op. Todd Wiley is a hog farmer from Walker, Iowa. After graduating from Iowa State, he began work for a genetics company. In 1993, he went to work for his father with his father's diversified farming operation. Shortly thereafter, he founded Interstate Swine LLC to handle the hog portion of his father's farm. He's got a farrow to finish operation. And Jim Foster is a hog producer from Montgomery City, Missouri. He's farmed for over 54 years, raises pure Hampshires, and has raised a variety of crops, including corn, soy, wheat, barley, and rye. So we have a good cross-section of folks from the Midwest and from the Southeast to discuss a variety of issues. And I'm going to start just in the order that I read the names and start with Eric Nelson. Eric, I think you probably appreciate and understand the risks associated with both sides of this operation as your involvement with the seed business and your involvement on the farm. So I'm interested in knowing from your perspective whether risks are higher or lower as a result of consolidation, or does the market essentially contribute to those risks, or does it mitigate them? So your comments about that and the competition issue.
Well, the risks are higher due to competition. And I guess, is this just a straight question portion?
Just a straight question, and you can amplify on it if you want.
Okay. The fewer competitors, particularly in my cattle operation, it's not unusual in a week's time that we're down to 15 and 20 minutes cash market per week, compared to a grain producer maybe has 1,500 minutes a week in order to make grain sales, and it's because there are only a handful of end users in the cattle market, versus especially in this part of the world with the coming of the ethanol industry and all of the ethanol plants that there are. You know, there are many more end users for grain, but on the cattle side, it's become very constricted. And on the seed side of things as well, sure, there are still many choices, but many times those choices are much more limited than they once were. And what's bothersome to me is customers will think that they're making choices from different companies when in fact they've purchased the same product in a different bag from different companies, but it's identical product.
Pam, You also have interest in a seed business, and so you've seen it from both sides. There was discussion earlier today about the increase in input costs, not necessarily being associated or connected to prices that the mid-sized operations are receiving. Is that just simply a fact of life, or do you think that there need to be some adjustments to the market?
Well, I have prepared remarks about that, but off the top.
Feel free. I mean, you all just amplify on, take the question and run with it.
Okay.
You just do what you want to do.
I'll address that in this, and then if you have further questions, I'd be glad to answer them. As you said, I farm in partnership with my husband and 2 sons. Our farm looks very different from those in my parents' generation. We've made progress in many areas and improved production. Today, we raise 3 times as much corn on 1 acre of land as we did back in the 1950s. We've taken advantage of tremendous advances in science and technology. These include improvements in genetics with corn breeding, the advent of genetically modified crops, and the rapid adoption of biotechnology. We use precise placements of seeds and fertilizers and follow best management practices. The use of GMO seeds makes economic and agronomic sense and provides efficacy with less trips across the field, less fuel, and a safer environment for us farmers, our families, and the environment. We have adopted biotechnology in soybean and corn production. We're not required to plant biotech seeds, but rather have looked at the value that the seed technology provides, and I guess that would be my answer to your question. And we consider the price of that value. Like other farmers, we speak with our checkbooks. If it's overpriced, we do not buy it. We have a choice in the seeds and traits that we plant. I have seen charts showing a very robust pipeline of new traits that will be available to farmers in 2010 and beyond. These traits are not coming from one source, but from multiple companies. And it will take significant industry investment in research and intellectual property protections by all companies, so farmers like me have innovation, choice, and competition in the marketplace. The world is a very different place than it was for my parents. In today's complex global marketplace, we are all interconnected. If there's a financial meltdown in Dubai or Greece, or a trade issue with South Korea or Japan, there are ripple effects that seriously impact my farm and our business in Floyd, Iowa. For example, we experienced this domino effect back in 1998 as pork producers. The U.S. instituted a steel embargo, which led the Russians to institute a poultry embargo, which caused a glut of poultry on the world market, which depressed hog prices to historic lows. Challenging as it is to compete in this global marketplace, I would not choose to live in the past. The challenges are balanced by the opportunities. Life on the farm is better for me and my children. We have access to technologies, tools, and markets our parents could only dream about. The U.S. is a maturing and aging economy with 98% of the world's population living outside our borders. There will be an additional 3 billion people by 2050. Agriculture is a core strength of the United States, ensuring food and fuel security for both domestic and international needs. And our farmers want the opportunity to be an answer to those enormous needs. We want to live in a more stable world where people are not fighting over food and oil. Science and governmental policy have a huge role to play in getting us there. The competition issue for me is in giving the American farmer the chance to compete on a level playing field, to supply food, meat, and energy for the world's needs. This means my government is involved in investments in ag research, biofuels policy, setting a more balanced tone in the food and fuel debate, and is increasing trade for all ag products. We need more public and private investments in ag research. I've been privileged to serve as the corn farmer on a team that's providing direction and to advocate for the funding to sequence the corn genome. This has been a strong partnership with the USDA, the National Science Foundation, and private industry. It's important because it opens the genetic potential of corn, puts all that information into the public domain so all researchers have access. Robust support of ag research needs to answer the fundamental scientific questions and get that research out to end users. I'm asking for support of dollars, but maybe more importantly, support of a philosophy. Farmers are in a daily battle to defend what we do. We live in a culture public opinion and policy is driven by media frenzy, and the affluent are disconnected from the hand that feeds them. We are all engaged in this battle to tell our story, and we need our leaders, our legislators, and especially our Secretary of Agriculture to do more to set the tone to get to the truth. The tone has been very divisive. Production ag is being discounted. It is, people are talking about food versus fuel, not food and fuel. There is anti-corporate sentiment, anti-big sentiment, drawing lines between corporate factory farms and family farms, whatever those definitions mean, I don't know. The media says big is bad, corn is bad, meat is bad. Farmers do not want to be pitted against each other. We all have a role to play, and the world needs all of us. Trend lines for corn production on constant numbers of acres continue to climb. Farmers have the ability to produce more than enough grain for our customers. There has been good government support for corn grain to ethanol in the past, but it is waning at a time when there are great needs for biofuels and bio-based materials. The issue at hand is the policy of indirect land use under the renewable fuel standard. Corn to ethanol is not allowed to compete with gasoline on a level playing field and is penalized by rules while gas is given a buy. This means that I, as a farmer in Iowa, am held accountable for actions and farming practices of a farmer in Brazil. This is based on assumptions in economic modeling that even the economist makers have admitted are measuring the unmeasurable. This is simply not right and fair to the American farmer or the consumer. I would ask that my government adopt laws and rules that are grounded in reality and issue you an invitation to come out to the country and see and talk with us. I believe that the future of ag is very bright, but it will take all of us working together to make it so. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and tell my story, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Pam. What I'm trying to do with this process is to make sure that we have an opportunity for dialogue. So as we do these statements, if you want to respond to a question and then read the statement, that's great, but hopefully we can keep it within an appropriate time frame. Ken, I noticed that you are involved in niche markets, and I'm interested in whether or not in the niche market area you see a competitiveness issue at all, and if so, what the nature of that is.
Thank you, Secretary. I'd like to just briefly explain, I'm part of a group that grows specialty crops, and some of those specialty crops are not genetically modified. And I'm also part of a group that became ISO certified. About 30 farmers in 2001 became ISO certified to verify our production practices and how we grow our crops, how we store our crops, and how we maintain the purity of those crops. We did this as a result of the food scare, and we felt that our organization could provide quality products to the consumer. As a result of this, we had very little interest from the food industry, and in 2004 we learned of a soybean that was developed at Iowa State University that had traits that were very specific to the oil content and produced quality oil. And I guess if I would, I'd like to share with you the history of a soya and what it did in the last 5 years and what maybe we learned from it. But this group of farmers thought we would grow seed, low Atlantic soybean seed, and that the whole world would want this seed when the food labeling law came. Well, we had the seed in the ground, 10,000 acres, and we looked around and there was nobody that wanted the seed. There was absolutely no demand for this new seed. So this group of farmers decided, well, we better start a company and process the soybeans into oil. And that's exactly what Asoya did. They raised money within the group, and they took the beans from that production. 90% of that 10,000 acres went into soybean oil. And we brought that soybean oil to the market, and Asoya accomplished many things there. The soybean oil we brought was a very high quality and purity, and Dr. Fear of Iowa State that developed the soybean said, this is even higher quality than I can maintain in the laboratory. We brought an oil to the market that had no trans fats, high stability, lower saturated fat, and a cleaner, lighter taste. After months and months of testing, because these food companies would test the product for months and months and months to see if it met their quality, they found many advantages for it in chips and baby food, in snack crackers, and many more. There were high reviews by restaurants that gave it superior performance in fryers, and of course it was trans fat free. It was also accepted by the soybean producers that began to grow this soybean. They liked the fact that it was non-GMO, there was no technology fees, and they almost, as time went on, stood in line to grow the soybeans. Farm Industry News gave it an Innovation Award in 2008. And we felt that we'd defied the odds and we'd brought a product to market, which everyone said we couldn't do. But in the last few months, the soya has been dramatically downsized. It's no longer contracting soybeans. And I might just share a few things I think that created the difficulties. There were wild swings in the marketplace, unprecedented high commodity prices, and it led to a dramatic decline in soybean acres in 2008. Nobody even wanted to plant soybeans when corn was $6 an acre. We couldn't get acres in. It also needed large amounts of capital, and that resulted in several injections of capital by the original members as well as outside venture capital. The corporate structure of the marketplace and the processors made the access to that market extremely difficult. Then the time lag between the time when they finally decided they wanted the product and we could supply it was as much as 18 months. We had to get growers, we had to plant the crop, we had to process the crop, we had to supply the oil. But most of all, what happened to the economy in 2009 led the users to reassess what they could pay for soybean oil. They were interested in the cost and not the value of our product. They could blend lower quality oil, such as canola or 3% linolenic soybeans, to achieve their food labeling laws. And we feel the government wrongly allowed companies to label food as trans fat free when you turn the bag around and it says it contains hydrogenated vegetable oil. And that's a contradiction. They've lowered serving sizes to unrealistic low levels so that they can get through the labeling law and say it has no trans fat because the amount is so insignificant. And that's true if you have 3 chips. Most people don't eat 3 chips. But millions were spent to bring a new company, a healthy, environmentally friendly company, and a cooking oil to the marketplace. Farmers had accepted the benefits of the seed and the procedure and the production for the storage and processing of those beans. There was thousands of hours put into this company, plus all the investments. And I guess the lessons learned, if I could just maybe sum those up, or maybe you want to ask a question, because I see my time's up. But the summary, I guess, is it's very, very hard for a small independent company to bring a food ingredient into the market. We thought we maybe had done it, and we failed. The specialty crop market is becoming concentrated, just like other parts of the agricultural industry. Many specialty crops might exist, but often one company controls the contracting, the procedures for production, the marketing, and the payment. The food industry is not overly interested in maintaining high-quality products or traceability when our group of ISO producers found practically no interest in food companies contacting us. And I think my time's up, but I appreciate your time to talk about this.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you. Eddie, as you talk about your operation, I'd certainly appreciate your views on your experiences in a diversified operation in terms of the challenges that you face in terms of input costs and markets.
I am a member of, there's 26 of us, independent, raising all natural pork. And it's been a battle to get there. Some of the biggest problems we've encountered, for instance, Whole Foods came in and offered all of us a contract. I'm the only one that didn't survive. I chose not to take the contract because once you take a contract, it's over with. Whenever they decide to shut you down, they shut you down. That's what it's basically all about. So my partners and I have opened up a meat market, and only to find out that in order to keep that meat market open, I'm going to have to put a processing facility on my farm, because without being able to process it, I can't say I'm raising all natural pork. So I've designed a processing facility, and you run into that same problem again. We need $200,000 to put this facility in. And the banks look at you and kind of smile, and you're still on that limb. And I encountered the same problem. I did 9 years of commercial aquaculture research at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. In '97, I moved 5,000 tilapia to my farm. When I went to market my tilapia, because I stripped out a hog house and put tanks in it, they refused to let me market my fish. But you got fish rushing in out of China by the tons, and we don't know what they're grown in. I haven't given up. I've got my facility designed, but all of it hinges on where the dollars are going to come from. And when you're already in debt, you don't need to get in more debt in order to operate. So basically what we're looking for is some grant money, some independent money that will allow us to go to the next phase. But no matter what happens, I'm going to continue to be an independent hog grower. I love it. My father did this. He had one of the largest hog operations in North Carolina as a sharecropper when I was 5 years old. And he left the farm when I was 6 and told my mother he was not going to work himself to death for someone else. But I couldn't wait to find a farm. So I spent 27 years running around as a Green Beret, and I would raise a few hogs, and every time I get about 100 hogs, they send me somewhere. So they sent me, I had about 200 head of hogs, all purebred Duroc, and they sent me to Howard University to teach. So I taught at Howard 4 years, Georgetown for a year. And all that time, all I could think about is I got to get back home to North Carolina, go back to raising my hogs. And so I finally got back, and the wife loves it. She was born and raised in Washington, D.C., but she loves the farm. So we're having a good time, but we're not making that much money right now. But it's in the makings, but you just have to be tough, and you have to stick it out.
Thank you. Todd, you're a hog farmer, and so you're obviously involved in the marketing of your hogs. As you talk about your operation and give your statement, I'm interested in your views about what you think the proper balance is between a spot market and a contract in fixing prices.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'll be happy to answer that question actually through the course of my presentation. I came back, as the introduction indicated, I came back to the farm in 1993, to a farm that was very diversified, corn, soybeans. We fed cattle and had a 160 sow farrow to finish operation. 5 years later in 1998, and if anybody who is in here remembers what happened in 98 in the hog business, it wasn't real friendly, similar to what we've been through in the last couple of years. I got in the hog business in 1998 with my father. We're equal partners in Interstate Swine, LLC, farrow to finish operation. I'm the managing partner. We've grown the business to 1,150 sows, and we market about 26,000 market pigs a year, which by most industry standards is considered a fairly small operation. But I'll explain a little bit as to how we got to that point. The trends in agriculture is one of the things that we were asked to discuss, and as you know, that there are less and less pork producers and less farmers in the industry as we've gone along. In part, that has been required because of the management techniques and the economies of scale that needed to be acquired just in order to compete competitively. And so our operation is probably bigger now than what I would have envisioned 15 years ago. But in order to capture the economies of scale, in order to utilize the management techniques and embrace the production standards that were set in our industry, in order for us to compete, we didn't have a whole lot of choice. It was either to grow our business, to capture those economies, or to exit. And so as a managing partner, I chose to grow our business. I firmly believe that independent operators have every opportunity to succeed, but we do need to be able to utilize and capture the economies. We need to utilize the technology and management strategies that the best people in our industry use. There are more there are less packers, rather, now that are more efficient in terms of harvesting and processing product. And for those of you who aren't close to the hog business, this is the way we are wired. We are wired least cost. The industry is based upon producing a high-quality, safe protein for the world consumption at least cost. And so that is part of the reason agriculture and pork production in particular looks the way that it does at the moment. You talked about the spot market, and currently as low as 5 to 6% of the pigs are on a negotiated spot market. That sets the price formula for about 50% of the pigs in production. I am one of those people who's on a formula price with two different packers. I do that for a couple of reasons. The primary reason, though, is because I fear not being able to market my pigs in a timely manner. For example, I have a barn that needs to be empty on Monday. I've got one load of pigs left in that barn. On Tuesday, the power washer shows up to wash, disinfect, and clean that barn. On Wednesday and Thursday, I reload it. I do not have the benefit of time because if you know anything about biology, biology doesn't wait on anybody. I've got pigs coming from the nurseries, I've got pigs coming from the sow farm that need to move through my production system. And so I've been reluctant to engage in spot price marketing or negotiated sales. I think it's necessary. I'm glad somebody does it. But in my operation at this time, we do not. I think it's also important to know that the packers need accurate price discovery as well. While I'm trying to get as much money for my pigs as I can, I acknowledge and understand the fact that they're trying to buy my pigs for the least amount that they can. And that's part of the capitalism formula that price discovery is important. Intuitively, I believe that 5 to 6% of those pigs basically pricing another 50%. Intuitively, I struggle with that. Is that enough? But that's all. I can't find any economist that can give me the number. Is it 8%? Is it 12%? So that's an ongoing challenge philosophically in my mind. We choose to sell our pigs to packers who don't maintain much ownership of pigs. I need to have a relationship long-term with somebody who needs me. And so it's got to be a mutual beneficial relationship. We do have marketing arrangements with both of the packers. One is a very rigid written contract, and the other one is a verbal agreement. My bank, my lender, has never required me to have that sort of relationship with packers. However, I am aware and know of lenders who do. Challenges in our industry, especially currently, are huge, profitability being the biggest challenge. We've suffered through a worldwide economic downturn, and on the heels of that came the H1N1 flu virus that unfortunately was misnamed the swine flu. The other challenges that we deal with are legislators who have minimal knowledge of modern production systems in agriculture, and so that's a challenge that we need to deal with. And finally, and the one that probably has the longest term effects for our business is the substantially higher input costs that we have to deal with, in part because of an ethanol policy that creates more competition for our primary feed grain in corn. And so we're concerned about what opportunities there are for that. And finally, probably the challenge that we're going to see coming forward is a higher cost in food, simply because our business is going to dictate that we have to receive more money for our product. Consequently, the consumer will have to pay more as well. I see my time is up. I still have more to say if you want to. All right. There are no I'm going to finish. When the Secretary of Agriculture tells you can finish, by golly, I believe I will. There is no magic wand to return farming and agriculture and pork production the way it was 20 years ago. I fear that it's impractical at this point. I think we're too far down the road to structurally change our business, to disallow packer ownership. There have been hundreds and probably thousands of pork producers in our state and in the upper Midwest who have changed their production capacities to fit into the modern contemporary system. And to disrupt the modern contemporary system from a legislative standpoint will cause significant challenges for a lot of farm families. I guess in closing, if there was one more solution that I would pose, and the one that has some long-term challenges for us, and while I am not opposed to renewable fuels, I am not opposed to energy independence, I think that at this point in the ethanol industry, it's time to eliminate or at least minimize the import tariff, and I think that it's time that we allow the blenders' tax credit to expire. We're not opposed to competing for corn as long as we can compete for it on a level playing field. Thank you.
Well, let's finish this first round from hearing from Jim. Jim, you've heard Todd discuss his challenges in the livestock business and his views about formula marketing and spot market. I'd be curious to, as you give your statement, your feelings about that.
Okay, and I'd like to say too, I imagine Eric probably has a little more time.
Yeah, he does. We'll come back to him.
Thank you. I'm humbled and proud to serve with people that seem so dedicated. I started being excited about this problem 11 years ago, and went to two of these things, they fell on deaf ears. I want to tell you, Mr. Secretary, I'm convinced this is not a dog and pony show. You folks mean business, and I appreciate it. I won't bore you with history of my 55 years nonstop in hogs, but I'll tell you for sure I've seen it about all unfold in front of my eyes. I plan to speak from the heart but shoot from the hip today about the serious trend we're in. My concern is not for me but for my kids and grandkids, making sure they can pursue the American dream as my wife and I have. Believe me, hog production is real close to the poultry model, whereby they would have to participate by invitation only. As I drove up yesterday, I remembered back to what I saw traveling the same highway in the 60s as I went to Austin, Minnesota to a hog show. I saw home-built hog shelters on lots of rolling hills of Missouri and southern Iowa, having sows with new litters. I saw barns across Iowa with concrete pads out front with 50 to 100 calves on feed. I saw veterinarians at work with their catch chute, feed trucks delivering feed, implement dealers delivering a new manure spreader or a feed grinder. I saw real economic growth all over North Missouri and southern Iowa. Fast forward to today, and what did I see? I saw where weeds grew up through the concrete cracks last winter because there's no cattle on feed. I see silos torn down or having been empty for decades. Remains of those portable hog houses are seen stacked rotting in the corner of the field. Very little human activity around what was once a thriving economic model can be seen. What happened? Perhaps the biggest thing, we were taken back by the Chicago School of Economics, where the biggest, toughest boar hog at the trough deserved to be the last one standing. No matter who got rooted out or even gashed, killed, or economically killed by his tusks, he deserved to win because he would be the most efficient, and that efficiency would be transferred to the consumer. That Chicago school is hogwash. The recent economic global meltdown is the most vivid, costly disaster caused by that thinking. Too big to let fail became the buzzword. Will our biggest of our packers and food retailers finally reach that level? We're probably close. If so, our food security is at risk. What is the true, real cost of so-called cheap food? I'm glad to read the Illinois Agri-News that a leading proponent of that, who's a civil court judge, has turned 180 degrees after he saw the economic meltdown. I'm here today to tell you our current price discovery system for finished cattle and hogs is absolutely broken. Not cracked or weakened, it's broke. 90% of all market-ready hogs are on the packer's doors with very little competitive bidding. Their hogs owned and raised by him are promised months ahead, unpriced, with the promise the producer will get $5 or $10 ahead over the Corn Belt average. But that is determined by the other 10%. Why would he bid competitively on the 10%? He'd rather slow down his kill speed. In reality, 90% is in possession, or you could say he owns 90% every day without bidding. Would a city administrator who owns a paving business be allowed to contract his own company to do 90% of the city's streets? Heavens no, he'd be history. Let's read Section 202, Part B of the Packers and Stockyards Act. It shall be unlawful for any packer with any respect to livestock meats, meat products, or livestock products to give any undue or unreasonable preference or advantage to any person or locality in any respect whatsoever, or subject any person or locality to unreasonable prejudice or disadvantage in any respect whatsoever. How do packers on a daily basis who purchase 90% of their kill from themselves, not violate? This is unrealistic. Market manipulation by packer-fed cattle was confirmed in '94 when a large packer addressed the Kansas Livestock Association, telling them that companies use their owned cattle to fill their needs when prices are up and stay out of the market when cattle are down. To me, this is antitrust, the whole 9 yards. When I was a kid, Sunday evenings, my neighbor would have 5 or 6 trucks loading his fat cattle to go to the city. National Stockyards, Illinois, he had 15 commission firms to choose from. 6 packers in St. Louis alone to bid on them. We truly had competition, and our cities and our rural areas thrived. I can't say we can go back and open those stockyards. I don't mean that. But I think perhaps an electronic marketing system or something could be arranged. Back then, packers agreed not to own cattle or hogs more than 14 days. I'm sorry, I'm up. Do I have to quit or can I continue?
I'll just give you a couple more minutes.
So we didn't have captives of flour hanging over our head. Then in '79, they kind of dropped that agreement. Packers built massive pork houses and feedlots, and farmers exited hogs in the '80s by the masses, and it's still going on. Since 1980, we've lost 91% of our hog operations, 41% of all cattle operations, 80% of our dairy. Since '96, we lost 30,000 of our feedlots under 1,000 head. Those are family farm feedlots. We are a net importer of beef. Instead of identifying the real causes, we're advised to kill a pig, sell it at the farmer's market off the back of your pickup. Promote agritourism. Let the city people help you feed the pigs and milk the cow. Offer bed and breakfast. These are all noble ideas, and I have super friends. This will not pay for a farm and buy health insurance. Pay more checkoff dollars so we can promote more exports. We've had exports of pork through the roof for the last 2 years and hogs in the 30s and 40s. There's some interesting things on exports and imports. I'll show you those. Cattle prices reached an all-time high in '03 when nearly all of our exports stopped. Here's the chart, USDA. The red line is exports. You see they dropped almost zero. The purple line is prices. Prices went through the roof when exports were almost zero. Why? Because imports also stopped. We stopped the Canadian cattle. Folks, that's a pretty big item. Here's the other one. That's competitive destruction. The packer had that competitive advantage when he could get those cattle out of Canada. You can see that from the graph. When he lost that ability, we once again had price discovery. Here's the other one. U.S. beef cattle and trade with our 17 FTA countries that we have a free trade agreement with. The red marks mean we have a deficit with them. You see anything that doesn't have a red mark? The total over 20 years, cumulative, is $37.6 billion. The brown line is imports to this country. The blue one is exports. We're losing. We have got to have a place to table to get beef on the front burner, these things. Ron Plain, economist at University of Missouri, studied trends for years, and he said we may have to return to the previous model of pork production whereby hogs are raised on the farm where the corn was raised and tended by the family on that farm. That's a super idea. I'm not interested in going to 1,100 sows. My kids, Ron Plain also said, you got to be big. You got to be good. You must have deep pockets. Well, I think Glenn Graham's told me that. My grandkids can have one of those. They can be good. They can't be big. They've got to start somewhere. They have to have market access. This is America, folks. They have to have market access. If Ron Plain's idea of the previous model of pork production is a reality, we've got to have price discovery, folks. There's no way my grandkids can fill all three. They can be good. We should not ask them to wait till they're 21, borrow $1 million, put up barns for Cargill or Tyson to be in this industry. Again, this is America. In closing, I know our stockyards won't reopen. Everyone need not have chickens, pigs, and a milk cow, but it's time we reinvented competitive markets whereby my grandsons and granddaughters can sell their products. And I want to say a great big thank you to our Secretary and our Justice Department. Thanks for standing firm, Mr. Secretary, on cool. With Canada's 18th case of mad cow day before yesterday, this is important. We appreciate it. We appreciate the progress made on the Packers and Stockyards. This is a new book. We appreciate that, and I know it's not done. There's language in here that helps us. We got to have it. Time's running out. Again, I applaud your efforts. Thank you for this opportunity, and I have my speech right here for press so they don't get anything messed up. But even more so, there's a yellow piece of paper. I really wish somebody would take the time to read to this whole crowd. Is that too lengthy?
Well,
it's a poem. Let's get Eric first.
Let's give Eric a chance. Eric, you have a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I had responded earlier to what I thought was just a specific question, but I had prepared a more complete statement. You know, in sitting here listening to the comments, it really strikes me how, one of the main reasons that I wanted to be here today is the next generation. And I want to thank my oldest son and my third oldest son for being at home today, out in some mud, not very pleasant conditions, working so that I'm able to be here today. But I believe bringing young people into production agriculture is the most important thing there is to the future of our food supply. And that bringing young people back is as simple as ensuring them a fair fighting chance at a profit. I believe our government has an obligation written in law not to pick winners and losers, but to act as a referee and to ensure the laws and regulations dealing with anti-competitive practices are enforced. Henry Thoreau once wrote, "The corporation has no conscience and thus is singularly driven for profit." That has become a problem for numerous industries, but specifically for the seed and the cattle industry. Hybrid seed corn provides a vehicle for increase like no other crop and has been key to the U.S. becoming the breadbasket of the world. But the U.S. seed industry, I believe, has been taken advantage of. I've seen technology fees to seed partners raised mid-contract in violation of the very contracts that the parties had. I've seen companies signing non-exclusive marketing agreements with one company only to have another company discontinue in retaliation another marketing agreement. I've seen misuse of confidential biotech seed stewardship agreements. I've seen pricing schemes using free seed that generally benefit the very large farmer at the expense of the small farmer. I've seen a reduction in conventional corn research in favor of biotech research. Not that biotech research has been bad, but the dollars spent on conventional research has gone through the floor. And that's put future yields at risks for all farmers. I recently compared corn yield on the same farm that I farmed for 25 years and compared the years 1987 and this last year, 2009. Bushel yield increased 25%, which is good, but the price of the seed and the chemical weed control together had increased 153% in that same time. I think we all agree that output is greater, but a large part of that is price. And if prices were half of what they are, I think there'd be a lot more grumbling about the price of seed today. I've also seen seed technology being sold with little or no consideration for the ill effects caused by the products. I have copies of studies by Dr. Huber from Purdue, and one by Kramer and Means is published in the European Journal of Agronomy, that show increased fusarium and mycotoxins caused by increased Roundup use. I've seen the effectiveness of new technology be overstated at the expense of the farmer. Monsanto Genuity Roundup Ready to Yield soybeans are an example. And then finally, due to budget constraints, land-grant institutions are no longer able to conduct the introspective research on seed that they once did. And the research they currently do is funded primarily by the seed companies themselves. Some will say that's efficient, but I believe that the research that's purchased by the seed companies tends to be rather self-serving. So how do we fix the industry? I say we disallow any monopolies and the anti-competitive activities that come with them. Somehow require that all germplasm be made available to the public through land grants or other public entities. In the beginning, you know, these inbreds, B73, Missouri 17, Ohio 43, were all generated publicly. And somehow, you know, my alma mater let, Dr. Hallauer let some of those inbreds go without getting a license fee, and because he wanted them to stay in the public realm. And in the public realm, I believe they should stay to spur competition. I say that we should enforce the Robinson-Patman Act of 1936, which prevents predatory pricing of like products. I've seen across a section the difference in the price of seed can make as much as, in the same bag of seed, can make a $70 an acre difference, an advantage to the large grower versus the small grower. If that large grower is farming 12,000 acres, that's $1 million more to the bottom line that he can buy a new farm with every year. And so there's no surprise that the larger continue to get large with advantages such as that. I'd like to require technology to be proven safe and effective, which could be accomplished by properly funding Experiment Station and the land-grant university system. And then also, I think we have to re-examine the safety and wisdom of granting long-term patents on living things. I also believe the statement the corporation has no conscience is very relevant to the U.S. cattle industry. It's been stated earlier that 4 beef packers currently have 80% of the slaughter capacity. Captive supply agreements reduce competition, and we need transparency. Also, the geographic center of cattle feeding and meat packing is illogically located far away from the feed resources that we have right here. Unlike grain, cattle are perishable and can't be stored until markets rebound. Due to that fact, domestic prices are very susceptible to changes in foreign demand. And finally, retail margins are excessive. When I sell a beef animal, it's worth around $1,200 at market after having invested time and feed for 18 months. Within 3 or 4 days, the wholesale, packing, and retail segments of the industry parlay that $1,200 into $2,400 or more dollars. I don't believe that would happen in a truly competitive environment. So how do we help the cattle industry? Break up the beef packing monopoly. The Packers and Stockyards has the auspices to do that, I believe. Require forward contracts to be transparent. And there's been a lot of talk about transparency, but I mean really transparent. So the day that a forward contract is entered into, that it's made public, not the day the cattle are harvested, because the users of the forward contracts will fill holes for months at a time, which end up meaning that there may not be a cash market for weeks or months at a time. We need to revisit free trade agreements to slow imports in times of weak foreign demand, enforce country of origin labeling the way it was written, and spur retail competition and thus beef demand. You know, in closing, I want to quote one of the famous speeches that's ever been given in this country. President Lincoln at Gettysburg referred to government of the people, by the people, and for the people. He didn't refer to government of the corporation, by the corporation, and for the corporation. I've asked myself, would all those who have died before Gettysburg and since preserving this republic want only a handful of companies completely controlling our country, its economy, and its food supply? I don't believe they would, and I further believe laws exist to prevent that thing from happening so long as they're enforced. Thank you.
Let me, to all the panel members, ask somewhat of the same question I asked to the first panel, which is that if you had to focus on one aspect of this, whether it's the pricing and marketing, the input costs, enforcement, what one suggestion would you make to improve the circumstances and situations for farm families in the country? What's the one thing you would want us to focus on first? We can start over here. Yeah.
I think we've got to get this captive ownership of packers to where they dwindle down. And I realize this problem of a lot of family farmers or contract growers, you can't just bring the hammer down tomorrow. But this thing of having 90% of their needs covered with very little bidding is destroying our market for eternity. To me, that's number one.
Okay. We'll just keep going down the line.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm still thinking. The question was posed to me by the DOJ when they first made contact with me about the concerns that I would have in my operation and what solutions could be provided. And I think that, that lends itself to your question. The biggest thing that could happen, as far as I'm concerned, I've told you before that the pork industry is wired least cost. The biggest thing that could happen for me and my business is to expand and grow our exports.
I think one of the biggest things that would help right now in this country is with the small independent farmers niche marketing. This is the thing that can take them over the top. And without niche marketing, it doesn't matter what you're producing, nobody's going to buy it.
Yeah, I agree, and I would expand on that. I think what farmers need is opportunity. They need the opportunity to make choices of what they're going to grow and how they're going to grow it in the best way possible, and that's needs to be free of the corporations that control so much of the industry. And the other side of that is the consumer needs the opportunity to buy what they want to without the corporations putting up what they want to sell to them, which I think is what we have today. Corporations decide what people want. Too much.
I think I'll go back to my statement about philosophy, and I've enjoyed listening to everybody speak on the panel. We all come from a different place. We all farm differently, and once again, I think that there is room for all of us. I started out very small too with 10 sows, and my parents, my dad had to go to work in town to support our family. So we've all come from different places, and we've end up in different places, and we have different philosophies. But I really would ask that not only of what the government can do for me, because that was a question that was asked, but that agriculture needs to start pulling together and quit being so divisive about only the way I do things is right. There's room for many, many kinds of agriculture. I see that in my community. I have small truck farmers working to supply local groceries. I see people that have a small number of pigs. I see a lot of farmers like Todd. And instead of fighting each other, I think we need each other, because one of our segment cannot fill what the growing population needs.
Obviously, the seed industry is a keen interest of mine, having spent so many years. And the seed purchase, there's nothing more important each year, obviously for the income side of a crop farmer, and obviously it's important on the expense side as well. But I think there has to be a vehicle in which the worthiness of these new products are proven before they can be sold, because I've seen it time and time again where new products are rushed to the market as quickly as television ads can be put on television promoting how good they are, but with the science behind them is transparent as far as whether they actually have benefits for the people that are buying them. And I think that's critical, because there's an assumption that's being made by many farmers that, well, they're told that they're really good, but I think that they are assuming that there's somebody that's checking up on the worthiness of these products. And the land-grant universities at one time carried out that mission, but because of funding constraints, I don't really see them being able to do that anymore.
as I look at the statistics in rural America, I must confess I have some very deep concerns about the future of this country because of the future of rural America. When I see that 900,000 of America's farmers, now about 2.2 million in number, have themselves to work 200 days rather, off the farm, essentially a full-time job off the farm to be able to keep the farm. And I see a net loss of 40,000 operations in the last 5 years in the mid to larger sized activities and farming operations. And I see the substantial decrease in the number of farms totally in this country. I just have some genuine concerns about whether or not we've got the right mix in terms of providing opportunities. So the question I have to the panel is this. If we take the steps that you've just outlined, are we going to be able 5 years from now, 10 years from now, a generation from now, are we going to be talking about fewer and fewer farmers? Or are we going to be talking about reversing a trend that's been in place for a number of decades now? Can we actually provide real opportunity for young people to get into this business? Because you've got an aging nature of farmers. Farmers have aged on average 2 years in the last 5 years. Now 57 years of age, average age of farmers. 30% increase in the number of farmers over the age of 75, 20% decrease in the number of farmers under the age of 25. And part of what I want to hear and what I want to learn is what is that, what are we going to be able to do differently, or what do we have to do more of to be able to reverse these trends? Because I think this country's got to get very serious about the future of rural communities, because we're losing population and that population is aging. And so that you understand what I'm talking about, 1/6 of America's population now lives in rural communities, but 45% of the people who serve us in uniform in the military come from our rural communities. It is the core of this country. And if it continues to shrink and continues to age and there continues to be less opportunity, then I think our country will be far worse off for it. So I'm interested in hearing from this panel, what specifically do we need to do to increase the number of farm families? What is it? You know, you can talk about all of the usual responses, and I've heard some of them here today. But we're doing a lot of what you all have asked us to do. We're, you know, expanding exports. Exports have doubled in the last 10 years. Doubled. And we continue to. We're the third largest year in history in exports in agriculture. This year is projected. 2 years ago, it was the highest level of exports. So we are doing a lot of that. What else do we need to do in order to make sure that there is, in fact, a future for young people in this business? We'll start with you.
Well, again, I'm tickled to have the chance to respond, because I think this is what this is all about. I look at the USDA payments and the caps. I don't see any justification for payments to the largest operators. In fact, I'm aware of numerous ones that they have so many different farm setups and entities that they've circumvented the rules as they're written and are capturing huge amounts of subsidies. That is one way to bring some young folks back. Being an operator of what I would like to call a more holistic livestock operation, where I buy very little commercial fertilizer, and my livestock operation really is my fertilizer manufacturing plant. That's a good way to do things, I believe, and it was a way that it was done years ago everywhere. And if there are any ways to promote that and have, you know, more local agriculture and more holistic ag to better utilize the manure resources that we have in livestock.
Pam?
This is a great question. I think all of us could talk for an hour about it. I think, for one thing, our kids have to have great educations in land-grant universities. I have 2 sons. One came back full-time to the farm. That didn't just happen. You have to add so much income to your business to bring them back, and we expanded in a lot of areas a seed business for him to operate. Just look for every single opportunity that's out there. He does some trucking. Second son is teaching school, ag ed, and works the farm on the weekends. I come from a great community. We've had a lot of people in our county, in Floyd County, that have worked on rural ag development for a long time. I was lucky to be on one of those panels, and we've looked at a lot of things. And I think as we look into the future, you didn't let me tell how old I am, but I'm the same age that you are. And agriculture.
You look pretty good for 29.
Thank you. I think there's one thing we have to realize, and that agriculture is not going to look like it did back when I was a kid and you were a kid. But that being said, there are opportunities out there. In my community, we've seen a lot of young people come back. My kids went to Iowa State. We've seen their colleagues come back. And maybe they can't do production agriculture full time, but there are jobs in ethanol plants, they're grain buyers. So maybe we can't create a place where everybody can be in production agriculture or what it used to be, but there is potential for a lot of jobs in the rural community, whether it's in biofuels, biorenewables, just a whole bunch of auxiliary businesses that can happen. It doesn't just happen. It depends on the leadership that you have in your county, and I've been lucky.
I think of a friend that visited the farm years ago and commented to us that, boy, a farmer has to do everything. He has to be an accountant, a mechanic, an electrician, a bookkeeper, you know, just on and on and on. And I guess add to that now maybe a marketer. And that's asking farmers to do a lot, and I think it's almost asking them too much. But I agree with some of the things mentioned. I do think it's time to tie payments to farmers more to their conservation practices, to the way they produce crops, more than just the volume of crops they produce. I know that's not popular, but I think that trend needs to continue. And I think we do need to look at specialty crops. There's no reason Iowa should be just growing corn and soybeans, or a particular kind of corn and soybeans. I think the potential to grow a variety of different kinds of crops in the future is going to be much greater. I think we need to look at who is going to be offering those, and how are they going to offer them, and does it present opportunity to the farmer, or are they offered to the farmer just as we'll pay X dollars per acre if you grow this crop for us. I think the farmer needs to take ownership in those new kinds of crops in order to help the health of agriculture.
Mr. Secretary, I think the solution lies in our 4-H program, an extended 4-H program, from the standpoint that kid takes that animal and he raises it, he competes, and he sells it. But the problem with that is, how does that child take it to the next level? And he looks at his parents, and we are doing non-farm income. And you say, well, what's non-farm income? This is that income that your father have to make in order to stay on the farm. So my kids went out and got jobs and are working. My grandkids break their neck to get to the farm. They want to learn how to raise the hogs and all the things that I'm doing. So I have a generation of kids that's coming on that's going to take it up and run. But most kids, once they leave the farm and start making money, they say, well, what's the use of going back? Papa's still struggling, I'm having to loan him money. So we need to extend those programs to where those kids can come out of high school, and if he wants to go into farming, he can go into farming. If he wants to go into college, he can go to college. All of our kids are not college material, but they are farming. They have the potential to be outstanding farmers if afforded the opportunity. Yeah, but that kid knows he can make some money, he'll work.
Todd?
Got a number of answers, I guess, to that question. I had a brother that was involved in our farming operation up until '98, and this was actually early in '98 before the thing really hit the fan. And he chose to leave our operation, and it had nothing to do with economics or finances. And so I think we got to be a little careful equating the decrease in the number of farmers in our country being all finance driven. There are other reasons people have left the farm. There is one thing that I think that could happen in terms of a revenue assurance program. We have a product available to us called the Livestock Gross Margin product, and I've never engaged in it, but I'm told that it's cost prohibitive. And so it might be worth investigating that product where if there was some sort of revenue assurance available to us that was affordable and practical to use, we might be able to engage in it and manage our margins some better. Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you for the exports that we have and the work that you have done in light of your comment here just a few minutes ago. And I guess to answer your question, how do we get more people involved in production and agriculture? People will go where the money is. And if the margins are higher, we'll get more people involved in the businesses. And so in order for margins to be higher, costs have to be lower or revenue has to improve. And revenue doesn't improve until we have an increase in domestic consumption or we improve and increase our exports. China is an enormous opportunity for us in the pork business. And I think as time goes on, that as their economy continues to improve, and one of the solutions that I actually identified in my presentation was as their economy continues to improve and their middle class becomes bigger and wealthier, we have enormous opportunities in the livestock business in this country to export there. Thank you.
I have several ideas. I think we've got to work on entry to the business. That's the big item. I totally agree 100% with Eric that we need some logical limits on farm payments. I think it should be per acres. And I know a bunch of people have beaten me up on this. I'm not interested in my tax dollars paying for somebody to farm 10,000 acres and eat me. There should be a limit somewhere that you farm so many acres. After that, buddy, you're on your own. If that were the case, there'd be more medium to even big-sized tractors with kids on them farming. Another thing, these government-guaranteed loans, and I hope to heavens they've quit. A USDA government-guaranteed loan, if you don't have any equity, you can get out here and plant a $1 million building on 10 acres. If you've got a good enough contract, the government will back that loan through the bank. Now, who would give you a good contract? Cargill, Tyson. This just eats us, my grandkids, getting started. Because a government-guaranteed loan, would they get a government-guaranteed loan to build 10 Smidley hog houses? No. That's got to stop. This EQIP money has to be brought back down. I'm not interested in helping clean up somebody's mega mess. I'm interested in my kids maybe having a chance. We've got to scale this whole thing down to where it benefits beginners instead of eating beginners' lunch, which is it's doing right now. One thing I want to add, Christine Varney, I want to thank you personally for the efforts you made on the JBS. Our adjoining county, Audrain County, Missouri, now has 3 fat cattle buyers because you stopped JBS from buying national beef. 3 ain't enough. We'd had 2, and I appreciate it from my heart.
You want to make some comments? Okay. I'm going to let Christine and General Miller, if he's interested in making any concluding comments, and then we'll wrap it up for lunch, and then we'll take 20 minutes and come back and listen to more farming activity.
Thank you so much, Secretary, and thank you for your kind words for the work that all of the division does. One of the things that occurs to me, Secretary, listening to this panel is that, you know, we've got a lot of our people here, and you guys have such long history and expertise in the Packers and Stockyard Act, and we have such strong enforcement on the antitrust side. I'm thinking maybe we need a little joint task force so that maybe I detail some lawyers over to you guys if you'll take them, and we'll really go through on the Packers and Stockyard Act and think about what we might do.
Let's see. Dudley Butler, you want to stand up? There's our Packer and Stockyard guy right there.
Yeah.
Dudley, would you take more lawyers over helping you out? Absolutely. That's done.
All right.
Deal.
All right. I think that clearly is one of the things that comes out listening to this group right here. way out my bailiwick, but I said to Tom Miller, I think we gotta figure out how to get Eddie is 200,000. That's on my list, so I don't know what I can do, but.
I'll talk to Eddie after.
Okay, good. This has been very informative for me. I'm going to continue to be here throughout the lunch and throughout the afternoon. My staff is here too, looking for the places where what I can do intersects with what the USDA can do as a new area for us. And I would like any of you to feel free to come up and talk to me about where you see as opportunities that we may be able to effectively address some of these problems. And thanks for having me. It's a great place. I've been delighted to be here.
Any comments?
Just following up on Chris's in a way, Mr. Secretary, if we could get a group of state attorney generals or assistant attorney generals who know a lot more of the substance than we do, frankly, that are working in the ag area, antitrust, and consumer, to work with packers and stockyards to brainstorm, to work together, to think about ideas, to try and get the results that the people want here today.
Okay, great. Well, let me just take just 2 more minutes to talk about what USDA is doing, because as I listen to the comments today, it occurs to me that we need to do an even better job of getting the word out about what we are trying to do to try to rebuild this rural economy. The President has been very clear to me that he is very concerned about the status of the rural economy and wants a new framework. So some of the things that we've done recently is to take a look at ways in which we can help farmers get access to additional information. We've heard a lot about the need for transparency, and we have more work to do in that area, but the expansion of broadband access and resources to rural and remote areas is one of the priorities for this USDA. We're in the process now of awarding well over $2.5 billion of grants and loans to expand broadband access so that farmers and ranchers have access to real-time information. It will also help small businesses in rural communities potentially expand their markets from local to global. We are also very aggressively promoting renewable energy and biofuel effort. The RFS2 that recently was announced basically gives us a very specific green light to go ahead with both corn-based ethanol as well as other feedstocks. We're going to make this a national effort to increase our fuel efforts. If we reach the 36 billion gallon threshold set by Congress, there will, over the next decade or so, be $95 billion invested in new facilities. It will generate either directly or indirectly 807,000 new jobs. So this is a very important part of what we are trying to do, and we are in the process of accelerating implementation of the Farm Bill regulations that will provide resources under the BCAP program for farmers and folks who are providing alternative feedstocks, providing additional resources for the construction of biorefineries, as well as retrofitting existing biorefineries to become efficient. So there's a major effort in this regard, and we continue to advocate to the EPA for an increase in the blend rate, which I believe eventually they will come to the conclusion that there are indeed a number of engines capable of taking E15. And then we'll set up a distribution system. So that's a second strategy. The third strategy has to do with local production and local consumption. And to Eric's concerns, and Eddie's concerns rather, about the opportunity if you have a processing facility on your farm, there are resources available under rural development, Eddie, and we'll talk afterwards, to try to create a greater link between local production and local consumption. So that we can provide more opportunities, additional market opportunities. Schools, hospitals, prisons, colleges that are located in rural communities have to purchase their food from someplace. We'd like to be able to at least give them the opportunity to do more local purchasing in the region. So there's an aggressive effort under our Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food effort to reconnect people with their food source. So there is a greater appreciation for what farmers and ranchers do in this country. I think there's a lack of understanding and appreciation not only as far as food, but also water resources, as well as fuel and the job opportunities it creates. We're working very hard on conservation and forest restoration to create new opportunities from that and to expand significantly the tourism opportunities associated with hunting and fishing as a strategy. And finally, we're looking at ecosystem markets, whether it's water, or carbon, or habitat protections, to funnel additional resources to encourage landowners to use their land as efficiently and as effectively as possible to generate as much income the whole point of this is to try to diversify income opportunities. And part of what we're doing here is to try to determine whether or not there are additional steps that we need to take in the more traditional processes to make sure that there is a level playing field for farmers and ranchers. And finally, we have a major export initiative that is focused on really distinguishing between markets. Not all markets are the same. There's been reference to China, which is certainly a potential market, but there are other markets that maybe in the short term have even greater potential for us if we establish relationships and break down barriers that exist. We're also focusing, obviously, on a biotechnology strategy because, candidly, the country has not done as good a job promoting the biotechnology opportunities as perhaps it should. And that's all part of the President's National Export Initiative. So on all these fronts, there is activity working at USDA. And because we are very concerned, and I'll end where I started, very concerned about the future of rural America and very concerned about the value system that is so centered in rural America. With that, we're going to take 20 minutes get your sandwiches, come on back. We'll listen to farmers for a little bit, and then we'll have our next panel. Thank you. Thank you.